Hey guys, and welcome back. So, if you watched the last video, we went over 5 things we wanted back in The Last of Us 2's multiplayer. The original game's multiplayer was stellar and had many great features that I personally want to see returning in The Last of Us 2. However, it wasn't all sunshine and roses, of course, as some aspects of The Last of Us factions were either broken, overpowered, needed tweaking, or were just seriously infuriating. This is in no way, of course, ripping on the original factions mode. It was a great overall experience that hasn't been matched by anything I've found in my years of gaming. However, some things are just definitely not as they should have been. Today we're going to be looking at 5 things we don't want back in The Last of Us 2's multiplayer. As always, don't forget to have your say about what you disliked in the original mode in the comments below. Now, let's get into it. The Last of Us factions had a great selection of weapons, each of course powerhouses in their own right, and all falling into a very comfortable spot where they could perform well in most given situations. However, some of the notably more versatile or frankly just annoying weapons came in the form of paid DLC. Not expensive by any means and miles better than any sort of loot box gambling system, as you could buy the weapons directly from the store with no middleman. But having these weapons as DLC purchases kind of just left a sour taste in the mouth. The tactical shotgun, the frontier rifle, the crossbow, the variable rifle, all of these guns stood out as extremely powerful choices in factions' varied arsenal, but having them locked behind a paywall felt egregious to say the least. Again, this system was miles better than any RNG loot box system, and The Last of Us was made in a time where this sort of thing wasn't really uncommon in gaming. I doubt we'd see a return to this sort of model in The Last of Us 2, but it still makes a list. Speaking of weapons, damage over time weapons are nothing new in the world of gaming by any means. It's been a common feature in a whole ton of games for decades, but it stood out as a bad feature in The Last of Us. Damage over time weapons came in the form of the crossbow, a DLC weapon that boasted cheap ammo, a spotting through walls effect upon hitting enemies with the bolt, and the ability to force players to either risk going down or use a health kit to stem the bleeding. This was the only weapon in factions that had any sort of damage over time effect, and frankly, it just kind of felt cheap to play against. You'd quite often run into multiple people using this weapon in a game, and while supplies weren't always hard to come by, especially not for things like health kits, forcing your opponent into using a health kit to stop the bleeding and another to get back to full health just felt way too strong when it could be easily done with one lucky shot. Generally speaking, I'm not really a big fan of the idea of damage over time weapons in The Last of Us. I personally feel that it just doesn't really fit the game. If it could be done right, I'm sure it'd be absolutely fine, but this is something that personally I don't really want to see returning. The Last of Us factions had some netcode and or some hit detection issues. It was kind of hard to tell. There are no two ways around it. I've been shot when I'm sure I shouldn't have been, and I've hit people I know I probably shouldn't have been able to. Whether this was down to wonky hit reg or some slow netcode, I'm unsure, but it never really felt great to be hit with those sorts of shots, or to hit the people you were firing at with, again, those sorts of shots. The Last of Us was made in a time before titles like Battlefield 4 showed us how important good netcode is, and whilst it was an issue, it only really became a minor annoyance rather than a major grievance with the game, seeing as it didn't happen all too often. Given that The Last of Us was released all the way back in June 2013, over 5 years ago at this point, I'm sure these issues won't be rearing their heads again. Nevertheless, bad netcode can absolutely ruin a game's multiplayer, so it makes the list. Okay, so this point was a massive pet peeve of mine, and by pet peeve I of course mean an absolute blood-boiling regular occurrence. There I am, minding my own darn business, when a smoke grenade lands at my feet and some cheeky bugger runs in and shoves a knife in my neck. Now imagine this happening every single game. The SHIV rush tactic was far too powerful in The Last of Us factions. It allowed a player to instantly win a 1v1 engagement with nothing more than a smoke grenade and a knife. See, in The Last of Us faction, smoke grenades, when they went off near a player, namely just around their feet, the radius wasn't massive, would stun players for a considerable amount of time, allowing the other player to run up and shiv them from any side without any resistance from the stunned player. Every game has its cheap and easy tactic of course, and SHIV rushing unfortunately belonged to The Last of Us. The ease of crafting smoke grenades, along with perks like Crafter that often allowed you to give gifts to teammates that could quite possibly be smoke grenades, made this problem quite prevalent, especially as you started to face opponents that dwarfed you in both player level and experience. Speaking of being outmatched, let's get on to our final point. The Last of Us factions didn't really have any real ranked mode or anything of the sort, they just kind of weren't popular when the game was made. Players just picked up a game mode they wanted to play, joined a lobby and off they went. It was a very streamlined system that allowed you to jump right in and play with very little delay, and it was great. However, this was at the cost of team balancing, especially if you were queued up with, say, 2 other players, leaving a spot empty. Quite often the enemy team would be made up of pretty good players across the board, often with a wealth of experience as their upper hand, whilst the random teammate you were given would often be a low level that was just kind of beginning to learn the game. This wasn't really fun for anyone involved. The high levels would just accrue an easy win without any challenge. You'd have the frustration of knowing matchmaking could put you in a match where the odds were vastly stacked against you, and of course the new low level player on your team would just be annihilated by the veteran players. This became more of an issue as the game entered the later stages of its life cycle, as is to be somewhat expected with most games, but it would be nice to see some form of balancing introduced in The Last of Us 2. If it means having to wait an extra 20 seconds to find appropriate teammates and opponents, then that is absolutely fine by me. The wait is worth it for a well balanced and challenging match. So those are the 5 things I don't really want to see returning in The Last of Us 2's multiplayer. I'd say most of these are reasonably subjective, and of course if you played factions I'm sure you'll have something to say about certain things you hated. So don't forget to sound off in the comments below and let me know what sort of things you really don't want to see returning in The Last of Us 2's multiplayer. Don't forget to leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it, and finally check out the channel whilst you're there. I'll be covering some more The Last of Us 2 content until the game's release, which I absolutely cannot wait for, along with content for various other games such as Dirty Bomb, Call of Duty Black Ops 4, Blackout, Red Dead 2 and more, so subscribe and turn on notifications to be the first to see the next video and join us on the road to 10,000 subscribers. Again, thank you very much for watching and I'll see you soon.